Hello, this is and we're here at the site of the OTech PACS training class in Dallas. And during our training class we typically have a session by Ken Compton, one of our guest speakers, that talk about image quality and monitors. And as many of you might not be able to make it all the way to Dallas, we thought we asked him to demonstrate some of the highlights that you can take home with you and really apply when you talk about monitors and image quality. So first of all, welcome Ken. Thank you to make it. And tell us a little bit first about test patterns in general, what people should be using and looking for.
Well, test patterns, and coming from the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, the pattern that I recommend all the time is the QC pattern as a starting point for all facilities. It looks very similar to the SMPTE pattern for those that have a stronger background in history, but it has a number of attributes that have been added to it that make it more medically inclined to find faults in the image quality itself. What we did when we did this, because I was a member of the Task Group 18 and developed this whole process, is we made basically two types of test patterns for the two primary sizes of display, what we referred to then, because CRTs were still in the industry, a 1,000 line display and a 2,000 line test pattern.
Okay.
One thing you have to always keep in mind with test patterns is that they have to be shown at the exact 100% size that they were originally formatted at. Otherwise, you lose the information that's supposed to be derived from it. So we have on this left-hand monitor here a very basic, it's the QC pattern for a 1,000 line display, and the two 5 megapixels to the right have a 2,000 line display test pattern.
Okay.
So fundamentally, whatever objects are on this are being basically twice that size on the 5 meg, and the reason for that is we have to double the pixels, because the pixel size on the commercial, like a 2 million pixel display, are roughly 1/2 of a 5 million pixel display. So the different pixel sizes do that. So you don't want to ever show a test pattern. It's something that's reduced, basically downsized with magnification, or increased in size, because you could make a good display look bad, or a bad one look good by altering that. So there's a number of things in here, because the error of this particular test pattern was such that CRTs were still out there. There's a number of items within the QC pattern itself that are really not germane to flat panels, because they just don't suffer from focus or geometry problems.
Sure.
So things that are meant to be square will show up square on any flat panel. But there's the basic keys on this, and from the SMPTE people looking at the SMPTE will probably remember a 95% square embedded within a 100% luminance square. And the luminance 100% is really whatever the display is set to.
Sure.
And then there's a black square here with a 5% in here. Well, what this should look like visually to your eye is equal acuity. In other words, this one in a bright block should be just as easy for your eye to pick up as the one at 5%.
Sure.
And both of these squares are actually the same number of digital driving levels different from their background, which turns out to be actually 13 digital driving levels out of 255.
Okay.
So if you think about that in terms of what the typical medical display is, that's roughly equivalent to at least 26 what's referred to as just noticeable differences.
Okay.
So they should be very visible to your eye.
Sure.
There should be no question in mind that they're there.
And by the way, we don't see them right here as prominent because of the lighting we have doing.
Lighting and camera make it
Sure,
hard, because
sure.
your typical viewing distance for this would be roughly 0.6 meters for good viewing. What we did different from the SMPTE is with these squares that go around this outside area, or grayscale blocks that are increasing luminance. This is not black and this one's not 100%. This one starts at basically at the 8-bit level, and this one stops at 248. So there are 8-bit differences between these, or digital driving levels, not 8 bits, excuse me. So you visually, when you look at this, you see a very distinct difference between each one of these squares,
Sure.
which is all well and good. And most commercial displays, if you look at this one, a 1,000 line display, 2 meg, it's an HD format, you can see a difference between all the squares. They're fairly good, and there's a nice difference between the 5 and the 95%. What differentiates this in terms of a test pattern from a medical display versus the commercial display is we added some small attributes within the test pattern itself that would mimic what it would take for your eye to detect, say, a lung nodule or a lesion that was very subtle. And those are found as low contrast targets in each one of these grayscale blocks. And you can see this when the camera's going to have a hard time picking it up. But there's a square down there that is actually 4 digital driving levels lower than the square's value. And opposite corners are the same. And then your opposite corners here are +4 digital driving levels. So that's roughly 8 just noticeable differences.
So, and these should be visible in each individual block.
Yes.
So each block will be in the corners, a little square.
Those squares all the way around. And when you have a much brighter display, a lot of times your eye is adapting to an average luminance. So sometimes as you get into the darker ones, it's extremely difficult to see the squares, low contrast targets in the corners down here. Generally speaking, if you can see the majority of these all the way around on a medical grade display, you've got an excellently calibrated display. The luminance is very well distributed throughout the whole range of the display. The thing that happens in commercial displays, which are not actually calibrated the way medical displays are, and that's one of the key differences. Medical displays all follow a log linear function in terms of their output in response to the digital driving levels. Commercial displays, on the other hand, are very different. They're meant for office environments, so a lot of times they're very strong at the top end. They're very bright for a bright office environment, but they're very poor at the low end. So they're not calibrated correctly.
Yeah. So for example, that's one of the key differences between a commercial and a medical display is because they're not calibrated accordingly to optimize for medical viewing. In the dark areas, you would see not the differences that you might necessarily
What you tend to see is a very brighter area here with less differences over here. Right now I have the calibration on this one disabled, and if I go in here and enable it, you can see an immediate jump and change in the actual darkness of the image. It becomes darker because we're correcting for the lower end more than anything else. All displays are sluggish.
So if you don't necessarily need to look at the corners, there's also this this text on the bottom, right? So
right. What we've done here with this is a nice quick visual test for it. I mean, if you're not getting into looking at the corners that sharply, the first square is at 0 level for its black, and then this is at the mid-level one, but it's 128, and this is at 255 for the background level. And because this is the brightest square, the L in the word control is 1 digital driving level down from 255, and each subsequent letter going backwards is 1 more step lower. And because this is the mid-range, we're going brighter than is surrounded. And generally speaking, a very well calibrated medical display, you should be able to see, obviously, all the word of quality. If you can't see that, you have a real serious problem. Generally speaking, the ROL of control is visible here, and because it's brighter, you may have to look a little bit closer. The ROL and control in the mid-range is fine. The low end tends to be the hardest part, and that's mainly because you have other bright areas around here and your eye has adapted upward. And just like any radiologist has done in the past with film, if you got a very bright spot in the film, they take out a piece of paper from their back pocket that's black and cover up the bright areas so they can see the darker areas.
So the first, if you want to check quickly whether your monitor is totally out of calibration or not, you start off with, can I see quality control, those 3 blocks, and then look at the corners, and it should give you already a good indication, right?
Yeah, if you go back 4 letters, back to the T, which would be 4 digital driving levels difference, that's the same differential with the squares in the corner that are plus and minus above and below the surrounding area. So if you can't see, if this is questionable to you here, you start looking in here in these squares. And what you'll find out a lot of times with displays, they may be very well calibrated at the upper end. They may have a very good distribution of luminance responses, and they'll be weak in the midsection. You won't be able to see them up here too well, and then they may overemphasize it down here. So you're looking for balance, and the 5 and the 95 is one of the first starting points for balance.
So if you take a display, let's say you have a teleradiology system and there's a radiologist that looks at chest at home, you would recommend that that every system has one of those patterns and that it will be regular checking for the text in the corners to feel, am I actually in calibration or not? So it's a visual check, right?
Yeah, it's purely a visual check. There's no light meters involved. It's just your ability to see with your own human visual system the details within the image. And all the vendors out there actually have this test pattern built into their QC software. So it's like this is pulled up right out of the vendor who supplied these displays. There's one other attribute for this that's still specific to flat panels, and has, again, it would be used for CRTs as well, but they're not in use anymore. And that's a grayscale ramp, and that would be from the bright to the darkest value, and the other side is the opposite, from dark to the brightest. And because this is the 2,000 line test pattern, it's starting out at 255 in here, and there's 4 lines for each value as you step down through here. On a 1,000 line display, it's 2 lines for each value to step through from 0 to 255. And what you're looking for there is a very smooth transition to grayscales. You do not want to see what looks like a sharp edge factor, like there's a large jump in luminance difference. It should look like a very nice smooth transition. And if you see a line, it would look like a line if there was a large difference between 2 areas.
Sure.
That would be what would look like as a contour line, say in the upper part of a lung field. So if you see contour lines in a lung field and you don't think it's actually there, it's not an anatomical feature, it's really present, would be to throw this test pattern up and look at your grayscale lamp and just see how well that looks. If it's not smooth, then that's got a calibration problem.
Cool. Now, this is a commercial grade monitor, and this is a medical grade monitor, and I know that in practice many hospitals might use commercial grade monitors, for example, in their OR or ER, I mean, but how can you make sure that the commercial grade monitor be calibrated? How would you go about that?
Well, you could look at it with a basic test pattern. With any kind of simple viewer, you could look at the test patterns from the T18 group. Okay, it can be thrown up. I use a viewer that's very simple.
Sure.
It can read DICOM images and can read any other kind of JPEGs or TIFFs. And you can put the test pattern up and see how well it is calibrated. Because if I disable the calibration on this one, you notice a difference in the luminance levels across the entire test pattern itself. Most of the word control down here is gone. I can still see most of it here, but in this case, because it's acting more like a commercial office product, the very bright areas are washing out almost the entire word control. And that's very typical of them, because you have 0 to 255 digital driving levels available. A lot of times a commercial display will hit max luminance at 200 to 230 digital driving levels, and then it's just flat from that point out. So that's where you start losing information.
Now, how would I calibrate a monitor? If let's say I go buy an off-the-shelf commercial grade monitor, are there any tools that you would recommend that people can use to calibrate these?
Yeah, there's you can do it in a software-only approach or a combination of software and hardware. Now, this particular device I'm using is made by Real Vision. It's a little black box here that does electronically what is generally found within a medical display itself. It automatically does that. So I'm taking a signal off a very standard commercial graphic card and running it through this little black box, which talks to the computer, and established a calibration for that unit based on a light meter feedback. So I looked at the natural response of the display, compared that to the DICOM grayscale response, and you map the 2 things together to create a luminance response.
And then you would calibrate that if you want to do that with a light meter, like one of these?
Yes, this is a very simple light meter that basically sells for under $150. A lot of photography stores have it.
Oh, cool.
It's very inexpensive, but it's quite accurate, really.
Okay. So light meter, a little box, and you can make something to get close to commercial or close, or
you can come very close. What I've done when this is in its enabled operating version, if I do a conformance test on this, what I'll find is that the conformance curve for this display is actually within a plus or minus 10% tolerance, which is considered diagnostic. But you have to keep in mind, because it is a commercial display, it doesn't have the luminance response to create a luminance ratio that's appropriate for medical.
Sure.
Where we're working with 250 to 350 to 1 ratios with medical displays. A lot of times you're lucky if you can get up to 200 to 1.
Now, are there any guidelines for what resolution monitors you would preferably use?
Well, the FDA has some real strict rules in terms of mammography specifically, which is for 5 million pixels, and that's because of the density of the information from either the film source or digital detectors. When you're looking at just general chest imaging, musculoskeletal images, a 3 megapixel display is quite appropriate. It's considered a 2,000 line display, which would be the next step down from this particular size at 5 million pixels.
So 3 megapixels.
But when you get into the ultrasound or the sliced images like MR or CT, where you're only working with an image that starts out at 256 square pixels, you're not working with a very high spatial content image to start with. Now they do have a phenomenal dynamic range, which does inhibit their appropriateness to commercial displays.
Sure.
However, you can put numerous sliced pictures up here, images up here, and through the digital tools of window leveling, you can extract the information out and have a presentation even with the 8 bits and just basically concentrate on an area of interest within the image itself for the dynamic lens.
Sure.
Present. So you can do just about everything on these. I know there's hospitals out there who read chest film on 1 million or 2 million pixel displays, but they're considered clinical level reads, like for clinical pneumonia within a hospital.
And another question, Ken, if there's sometimes a software issue, and I understand sometimes there might be different lookup tables or different processing that can be applied by the vendors of the PACS systems. So when we want to make sure that we identify those issues as well, we don't necessarily probably want to take the image that's available at the monitor, on the monitor by the vendor, but go early in the pipeline, correct?
That's true. There's been a number of instances that I've seen in my consulting capacity, where the various lookup tables that occurred in the entire pipeline, like from the modality lookup table, say it's a CR device, and then you have your PACS software, which has lookup tables. Of course, your CR has the modality, not the modality, but the anatomical tables that it picks based on what part of the anatomy you're looking at to optimize the image. And that has to be then piped in through into the PACS system itself, which has its own set of lookup tables occasionally for different things. And then you get into the actual lookup table, which we refer to as the grayscale display function, which is part of the DICOM standard. And the problem you run into in a hospital facility is if, say, a patient was imaged with a CR and also an MRI, and there was a lung lesion in there, and it showed up on the MRI but it didn't show up on the CR machine, you've got a question there, which one is right, and why did one miss it and the other one didn't? In instances I've seen where it was roughly the elephant in the room and it was missing on the CR device, and it actually turned out to be the PACS lookup table, which needed basically a software patch put on it to fix the issue. So what you end up doing is you have to isolate the actual workstation from the PACS. If you can do that first, make sure the workstation is actually calibrated properly by putting
the monitor.
So you
bring up the test pattern from the vendor that is provided the monitor, and then you want to ensure that
once you analyze this and you're satisfied that the actual display function between your computer graphic card and the actual image file for the test pattern is correct, it's presented correctly.
Sure.
You've pretty much eliminated that as a possible source of the problem. At that point, you can take the QC test pattern or one of the 3 anatomical test patterns that are also supplied by APM and inject that into the front end of your system as if it came off the CR or the MRI machine. And just let the pipeline treat it the way it normally treats it and see if the image then looks corrupted.
So, and we can do that because there's a DICOM representation with the heading and everything of those images available. And then we can maybe put it on the CD and insert it into the PACS system or any other, as a test system. So as a test image, and then go through the whole, bring it up in the viewer, right? And then we should see the same as if we would not use the software, right? If it's treated correctly.
Because the TG18 QC test pattern is in a DICOM format, both an 8-bit and a 16-bit TIFF. You can inject a test pattern in addition to an anatomical test pattern, a test image, into the system and see what it does to it. And if there's something wrong with the LUT that it overcorrects for some reason, some area of the response all the way around from the darkest to the brightest areas, you will notice the difference in the image quality.
And these test patterns, they're publicly available. You can use download from the internet, right?
That's correct. The original chairman of AAPM TG18 was at Duke University, and the Duke University website is where you can download all the test patterns and the document itself that explains everything.
Okay, so in the document, I mean, even if we forget a little bit about all the characteristics, we can even find back how to interpret it and what it...
There's appendixes within the original document that describes every nuance of this test pattern. How many pixels form a small square there, and plus or minus how many digital driving levels.
Okay, great. So, Ken, sometimes I see questions on those scopes, and maybe some people ask me directly, how long would those monitors last? And so, when would it, and how would I find out when I would replace them?
Sure. lifetime of the monitor in terms of the luminance level, which is what you're looking at for a specific set point for calibration, you have to look at what the original specifications for it, and we, as a hardware person from my background, we looked at the lamp sources and they rated them at 50,000 hours of their half-life. So if you drove them at 100% of their rated drive voltage and just let them deteriorate over time, which is roughly 10% the first few thousand hours, then it slows down quite a bit. You can average normally 3 to 5 years out of these displays easily. It really depends on how you use them in your facility.
3 to 5 years meaning 24/7 or?
Yes, it would be.
Oh, okay.
You can generally do that because when the monitors are calibrated by the factory, they don't drive them at 100%. We always targeted 75 to 80% of the lamps actual 100% output as a starting point. So we always had plenty of room to grow underneath that to increase the drive to the lamps to bring the light output back up. But it's very important for a facility to remember to turn them off. If they're not used, turn them off. Don't drive the lamps. It's not like your old CRT when you put a screensaver up there and a little icon would float around the screen and you said, I'm really saving the life of my CRT, and you actually were. But with flat panels, it's a very different story. The lamps are always running at 100% of what they're set to. So whether you have a screensaver running or not, they're still LED. The whole screen can be black and turned off. The lamps are still on.
Turning off meaning not to sleep mode, because you really need to make sure that you have no power to the unit, so that.
Well, it can still have power, so it can sense a sync signal coming and turn itself back on.
Oh yeah.
Which would be not a standby, but a true sleep mode where the actual lamps are turned off. And there's really no concern with the warm-up time with them, because all medical displays, now it wouldn't be concerned with a commercial grade display. Medical displays have a closed-loop control system for lamps, so from the moment you turn them on, it's constantly correcting for any error in the light output.
Yeah, and I think you told me before that if you wouldn't do that, it probably takes about half an hour to stabilize, right? Isn't it?
Oh, a good 20 minutes for it to come close to anything stable. The test we ran, it took almost 120 minutes for the lamps to stabilize at plus or minus 2% of a given drive voltage.
So that might be actually a consideration for commercial grade monitors. That you might, if you switch them on, often you switch them on in the morning, and there's a commercial grade monitor that does not have the closed loop circuit, you might not want to look anything diagnostic for the first 15 minutes.
No, you'd want to definitely, if you're going to calibrate it with either a software solution or a hardware software solution, you want to let it warm up a lot for at least 30 minutes. At least achieve some kind of thermal stability in the backlights.
Okay. So imagine we have this commercial grade monitor, we bought this light meter, and then how much is it involved? What's involved in the calibrating? How hard is it to do? Can you show us a little bit how to build it out?
Sure. We're not going to actually calibrate this. We're going to do a conformance test to prove what its response is. I've already actually calibrated this one. But when you're working with a commercial grade display, the software packages will generally default to some number of test points to start out with, out of the 0 to 255 available. Normally speaking, it's somewhere around 17 or 18 is what they start with. Depending on the quality of the display, and when I did a white paper for the company that has this control box, it's actually controlling this one. I found that particular commercial display would not calibrate properly or even close at 32 test points, 64 or 124 test points. I had to go to all 255 to get a somewhat accurate response. In contrast to that, this particular brand here, which is a higher quality display, I can do this one with 32 points and get an excellent response curve out of it. And it's just a difference in the quality. So you have to be careful what you buy. I mean, you just can't buy the cheapest.
You don't want to buy, you don't want to buy the bottom of the line.
Okay. So what it's already preset to go as soon as I hit click, I need to have the light meter basically held to the center of the screen, and I'll just click OK here, and it'll prepare the test. And what it'll start doing, it'll black the screen out. The actual software will take complete control of the display. And it'll start with the darkest level, and in this case, it's only going to do the incrementally test in large steps. So you're going to see large steps. So this is kind of a coarse conformance test, but it gives you a good idea of what it looks like.
So this
you can do this for all 255 steps, but you'd be sitting here holding this thing up for a few minutes. And one thing to keep in mind, anytime you're working with liquid crystal display solutions with a light meter, is never add extra pressure to the screen, because if you put pressure on it, you squeeze the liquid crystal material out of the way and it gets brighter. And you'll distort your results dramatically.
So this took only like a minute or so.
That's because that wasn't that many test points. So if I go back, and I want to go back to reports, the latest, for that display, because it's the only one being functioned but controlled by that conformance. And there's my test results.
Okay, cool.
And it's set right now with a plus or minus 10% band, which your camera may not be able to pick this up, but there's a parallel lines basically sweep down. The squares that are representative of the target values we wanted to hit, and the X's are what it actually measured. So we have 2 points basically, they're right on the line. But again, this is the diagnostic tolerance line for plus or minus 10%. If I change that to secondary tolerance, plus or minus 20% for clinical referral type applications, all the data points for this display are well within that parameter. So in that sense of the term being responsive to the grayscale display function, it's accurate.
There's actually not a lot of work. There's like, look at the QC test pattern, and then if needed in 1 or 2 minutes, doing the calibration. It's not. I mean, it's something that definitely is feasible and not too much of a burden potentially.
No, it's not. A doctor could do this at his home office with very little instruction.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ken.
You're welcome.
Sure.